reading comes from Matthew 7. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on a rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. So how many people remember when you were growing up the story of the 3 little pigs? Do you remember this story? All right, good. Well, I'm going to tell you that story again. For those of you who might not remember, there were once 3 little pigs, and they lived out in the forest, and in that forest lived the big, bad wolf. And they knew that they had to be in a safe place. These little pigs knew, and so they decided they had to build themselves a home. So our first little piggy, let's go back, I think. All right, we got those guys. All right, so the first little piggy, he built himself a house made out of straw. And he did that because, well, this little piggy really liked to frolic and have fun. He was kind of the partier of the group. And so his idea of building a house was not going to take very much time. He saw some straw laying around, threw it together, wham, bam, got himself a house. Looks good. And then the next little piggy, our second guy, well, he figured he was going to outdo the other one. But not by too much, because he was like, he saw the other guy, he was like out partying, having a great time. So he threw together some great sticks that he found in the forest, and he built himself a beautiful, like a little log cabin over here. And it's very nice. And they were done, and they had time to have fun, and they could party a little bit, and enjoy themselves. And they did this while they were watching, if we'll change the slide, while the other guy is very busy. Our third little pig decided that he would build a house out of bricks. And that was what he would do. And as you can see, he's busy. We got beer drinking, flute playing pig over here, having a great time while this guy is like, I'm building my house. So along comes the big bad wolf, and he comes to the first piggy's house, and he says, I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house down. And he did. Little piggy runs to his friend's house, and he jumps into the stick house, and the wolf follows him. And the wolf gets there, and he says, I'm going to huff, and I'm going to puff, and I'm going to blow your house down. And he did. And now the wolf follows the 2 little piggies. They're like, well, we better go to our friend's house who has the other house, right? They run to the other house, and they go into the brick house, and the wolf comes over, and he huffs, and he puffs, and does he blow the house down? He cannot blow the house down. To no avail, the little piggy's house stays standing, made of brick. And that is pretty cool. Now, when I was a kid, I had to think about what did the story mean to me. When you were a kid, did you think about what the story meant to you? What does the story mean? Well, it probably means that you should not be idle and do nothing. That's part of the story. The other part is doing good work. You know, take your best, don't do sloppy work, do your best. I'm sure for a kid in like 2nd grade, you probably need to hear over and over again, you really need to do your best work. Though this is lovely how you pasted the pictures, maybe next time you could get them in the squares that you were supposed to put them in. There's many things that kids need to do when they're young, and we hear this. But you know what? As we grow up and we hear this story, it takes on some new meanings to us. In fact, when I was thinking about our gospel today, that was the first thing I thought of was 3 little pigs. I'm like, oh, huff and puff and my house blew down. And maybe it did for you too before you even started reading. Maybe you were also thinking, this sounds really familiar to me. And I think that Jesus here, in the midst of all of this, tells a sermon to a group of people. And we need to kind of understand where this little teeny part of our gospel that I read, where it comes from. And this is the very ending of the Sermon on the Mount. And I don't know if you guys remember, I'm going to take you way back into March when we were actually going through the Sermon on the Mount. It goes on from book 5 through book 7 of Matthew. It's quite a long, long message. And this is the very end. This is where Jesus sums everything up that he said and comes to the conclusion. And we also don't really know a lot about who's there, but it says, first it says, my disciples. And are we disciples, the 12 and no more? Or is it disciples, we've gathered 100 now? But we know there's also gathering a crowd. And we kind of wonder about who that crowd might be. And at this point, we have a crowd of people who are probably the looky-loos. So you've got your disciples, they're there for a purpose, and then you have your looky-loos, who are kind of looking like this, like, so where's the miracle? I heard you're the miracle guy. Where's the miracles? You know, they're not really sure that they're there for Jesus, but they're there to see the miracles. Everyone wants to come for that. And so this giant crowd has formed, and they are listening to every word that Jesus says, waiting for something. And this is how Jesus sums up the Sermon on the Mount. And this is where he says, "Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock." For me, the two things that jumped out at me more than anything in that first sentence were that there were two action verbs. Two. The first one was to hear. The first thing I actually have to do is I must hear the words of Jesus. And so I started to think about this. Well, where do we hear the words of Jesus? How do I know I'm hearing the words of Jesus? And this is a question we always ask confirmation kids, Sunday school kids. And in fact, I asked this kind of a question while we were sitting. I asked the kids, so how do we hear from God? And one of the little girls goes, Jesus. And I was like, well, that's a spot-on answer, kind of a guess, but it was a spot-on answer. I liked it. I was like, good for you. So today, you are going to participate in letting me know the answers to my questions. So be prepared. I'm looking for answers. So my first question is, where do we hear Jesus' words? Shout it out.
In the shower.
In the shower, okay. Where else do we hear Jesus' words? The Bible. The Bible, good one.
In church.
Here in church, another good one. Food bank. The food bank? Oh, well, you've moved into some of my other ones. Good for you. Anybody else?
Just when we get good thoughts, I think we're hearing them.
Hearing the good things that are coming in, not the bad things then.
Right.
In my car. In your car?
My own mouth.
Your own mouth. Speak the words of Jesus.
As you speak the word, you hear it. I speak the words, I hear them, and I resound in them. The work I do, I spend a lot of time with people that don't have, and set it up so that they can maintain their energy. And it's in talking sometimes with them about a love and a better way to get things done that I feel Jesus talking through me to these people.
So you have Jesus. I like that. Is wonderful. The only one I didn't hear so far yet was prayer. I guess it was way back. I didn't hear it though. Okay, way back there. So then I asked this question, and I think you guys already answered it. So I'm going to say the question, and then I'll say what I heard you guys say. So how do we hear Jesus' words? And then we came up with all the places that we actually hear them. And we've talked a little about when. When do we hear Jesus' words? And you said, thank you, because that's one of the greatest places, in the food bank, at your work. Where are the places that we actually hear Jesus? Because it's not just the small voice in the back of your head, but it's when people are speaking to you, talking to you, communicating with you. When you walk through life, there are just times when Jesus speaks to you. Yesterday for me, it was when I came across the homeless man that was sitting out in front of the restaurant I was at. And I stopped and we had a conversation. And I stopped because it was Jesus sitting there in front of me. Not because I needed someone to talk to. I was there with my girlfriends and my daughter, but I stopped. Those are the moments that Jesus wants to speak to us, and those people are in our lives in those moments for a purpose. And so we have to be prepared to act on that and to hear what's going on. And I skipped forward. So the next verb is acts. Acts. And in our verse here, we have to do something. So I'm allowed to hear it, and that's good. Hearing is good. Thinking is good. Hearing is good. But now I have to do something with it. And it says that, and I got to go back because if I read it without the whole thing, it doesn't make sense. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock, and that is where it is. built his house on a rock. He did something. He started building. As Californians, we know a little bit about building, right? How many people here have lived in California long enough to say they've been through an earthquake? How many people in California long enough? For those of you who have not had to, blessings to you, it will come. Sooner or later, it just happens. It's California. So what we do, we rock out. We know in California, from watching the earthquakes and all the things that happen, we know how important a strong and sturdy foundation is. We know that the foundation in which we lay our houses on is extremely, extremely important. We know that the old houses that were built on little wood beams that supported their house, what did they do in the 1989 earthquake? They fell right off. We now know that we build our houses on cement slabs, and we do things very differently than we did in the past in order to have a strong, sturdy foundation. So when the rains fall and the floods come and the winds blow and they beat on the house will not fall. And that's our action. The flip side to that is that for those who hear and don't really listen are like foolish men, and they build their house on sand. And I'm going to go back to the 1989 earthquake. How many people remember the 1989 earthquake? How many people remember what happened in the Marina District up in San Francisco? What are the homes up in the Marina District built on? Landfill and sand, and more sand and landfill. And what did they do? They all came down. It's just as simple as that. We talk about the importance of a foundation. So if we know how important a foundation is, then do we understand in our own lives the importance of setting up a foundation for our lives? And if we do, is there something that keeps us from doing it? We all know we need to have a good, secure life. We want to make it sure we're secure. But do we act on what we know and build a strong foundation? I know that if you were to lay bricks, and anybody in here done bricklaying? It's not really a fun task. Okay, I got 2, 3, 4, got more back here. When you lay out bricks, the first row is what? The most important row. If that isn't secured correctly, we're in big trouble, right? Is that correct from those of you? And what was that? Level. It's got to be level. That's exactly right. So we've got a level, we've got a first row. Now, the second row, if I were to do it and I were to put them willy-nilly, is that going to make for a strong, supportive wall? Anybody? If I did like one every other spot and then I made them kind of crooked, no. What will happen to that wall? It's going to fall over. Okay, so it's going to fall over too. So I think about these things, and I think, so this is my life. And in our lives, we are really like a brick wall. We are just piecing ourselves together one thing at a time. And if you can imagine through your lifetime, from the time you were very small to the time that you can't remember anything at all, so we've got a big span here, there are going to be bricks that you're going to be making into your foundation. These bricks are very important, and they are what will support us when we need support. And so Jesus says, if you build on the rock, and we'll just say on the firm foundation, you will be able to weather storms. And so we have to think about, what do we need that is going to procure that strong foundation? So what do you need in your life to build a strong foundation? Throw it out. What do we need? Faith. More. Come on, let's go. We got more than that, because that's a lot, but I don't think that's enough, is it? Family. Love. Friends. Anybody got anything else? Prayer. Work. Those are all good. Anybody got anything else? I didn't write anything down. I figured you guys would have all the answers. So I didn't think I had to look them up. Church. Education. It's like, that's pretty helpful. Money. It's sad, but it's true, isn't it? A good savings account. A nice retirement fund would be nice. We don't all have one, but it would be kind of that's a pretty good foundation to have. And as we talk about all those things are what we feel like are pretty easy to have, but they're really not. they all require work. Having family, we can all have family, but it doesn't mean it's a well-structured family. And there's work that goes into having a family. So each of these bricks that we lay into our foundation, we have to work at. We have to be a part of that. And I think one of the other things that came to me is that when Jesus talked about this, he said a rock. And I started to think, Jesus talks about things being difficult, and rocks are really hard. If you were to try and build, anyone ever tried to build on rock or with rock? I've gardened, and when I hit a rock, I can only begin to say the things that want to come out of my mouth when I hit rock. It's like, because your shovel doesn't go through it. Nothing goes through the rock. Now I have to dig out and around the rock and by the rock or whatever. You can't go through rock. Rock is it's a hard stone that's very difficult to break. It's not something that you can just work with, and it's not something I want to work with. And I started thinking, well, why would, Jesus is built on a rock. And I don't think literal, especially because I was looking at pictures of houses built on rocks, and I thought, well, that doesn't look really very safe either. I'm like, I don't want to live on a rock. But maybe what Jesus was saying is, it's difficult. Building on a rock is difficult. Building on a rock isn't going to be easy for you, right? It's going to be hard. If you decide to build on a rock, it will be hard. It's not going to be simple. And I started thinking about all the other things. Matthew loves to write about how difficult it is to follow Jesus. One of my favorite verses, Matthew, it will be easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it will be for the rich man to get to the kingdom of heaven. You're like, oh, what? Matthew is not confused at how difficult it is to follow Jesus. Jesus' words were difficult. What's another one? You are expected to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that's another one. I don't want to do that. We've already talked about my neighbors. He left me a nasty note the other week, too. So my neighbors and I, that's not always the people I want to love. And another one of those, pray for your enemies. I don't pray for my enemies. Why should I pray for them? I have a hard enough time praying for the people I love. I'm going to pray for my enemies. Yet I think Matthew understood how difficult Jesus' messages were. They were difficult. These weren't easy messages. And it's in that difficulty that we start to look at why Jesus is saying, but you have to build it on a sturdy foundation. You put it on that rock. That rock is going to be a little bit harder to build on, but guess what? It will sustain you. That rock is strong. And when the winds come and the waves crash and the rivers rise, you will have something that's sturdy. That you will have built something up that is not going to just be poof in the middle of a storm. In your life, you want to have built up your foundation enough to weather the storms. And there will be a lot of storms. There are just storms all the time. We don't know when storms are going to happen in our lives, and they're going to happen for each one of us at different times. It could be illness of a family member. It can be a crazy death. It could be a loss of a job. It can be so many things. We don't know when that storm is going to come into our lives and wreak havoc. But we do know that if our foundation is strong, that we have family we know will support us. We have friends who we know we can talk to. We have a faith that we know we can rely on. Our foundation is strong, and we know we can weather those storms. So, as always, there is homework. You have homework this week. And this week, I'm allowing you to be an inward-focused person. Martin Luther would say that we are curved in naturally, which means we're self-centered. It's our normal place to be, which is kind of what the scripture says. And what I want you guys to do is I actually want you to start looking at your foundation. I want you to look at your foundation. I want you to start looking for the cracks. I want you to look for the holes. We all have them. They're there. It's natural. I want you to look at them. If it's your finances, I want you to look at your finances. If it's your family, go and make amends to your family where you can. If it's friends that you haven't called in years, call them. I want you to look at your foundation, and I want you to shore it up. Because the most important thing is if your foundation is not shored up, you are not going to be able to do the work of God. Your foundation has to be strong enough to withstand the storms so that God's glory is always there in your midst. Always there. Now, there are times when you'll be in tears that God's glory is with you and people see you getting through that storm and they want what you have. People want what you have when your foundation is strong. We've all said it. I don't know how she's doing it. Her husband passed away and she's raising those 2 children and her mom, is sick with cancer and the list goes on. And we stare at these people who are doing it and we go, I don't think I could do it. Well, if you don't think you could do it, then my question is to you, why not? My question is, go look at your foundation and I want you to look at the holes and fix it. We all have the opportunity to be built on a rock and know that our security is there. Our faith will guide us through that time. Our faith will take us through this. But there is more to our foundation, and you need to work at it. It's what God calls us to do. Jesus asks us to be in community. It is who we are made to be. And so that's your homework. And I'll pray before our band starts. Gracious God, we thank you for placing us here in this room today to hear a message, to hear what it looks like to have our lives on a rock, to be safe and secure because of your word, because we know that you are here with us. Lord, help us as we go through this week or 2, as we look at our own lives. Be with us as we try and find the missing spots, those areas that we need to shore up so that our foundation is strong and so that we can continue to do your work. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.